Yeah. So the idea for this lecture would be make it as interactive as possible. So I asked Charlie just to go ahead. I'm sure that you are familiar with his CV, but nevertheless, from your mouth, it's much more interesting, much more motivating also. Mm-hmm. But after that, I would really love to have a very intensive discussion with you, so that we can really use the time to discuss and reflect things. If that's also all right for you, we just play it by ear. Is that okay?
That's great, actually. I think it's the only way to go.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you so much for...
Floor is all yours. I'm going to sit down.
You're going to sit down here?
Okay.
And then I'm going to wander around.
Right.
Well, I think I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm always thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to the younger generation. And as I'm getting older, since you're going to be the leaders very soon, it's important to collaborate and partner and maybe learn from each other. I learn as much from you, if not more, than I offer to you. And so it's very important to keep that interaction and to interrupt me today as I go along. I'm also very intrigued by the positioning that Peter did for us here in really combining the theoretical aspects with the practical experiences and implementations, because that's what my life has been pretty much. I try to understand a theme, a topic, and then I dive deep into it, and by understanding it more, it always happens that I get some leadership cooperation opportunity then to hopefully make a contribution to a holistic understanding, right, of how we need to move forward in order to have a positive impact for humanity and the planet. And that's our motivation. It's really, when I say our, it's important to understand that most of the work that I do is with my wife, Lisa, and she's not here today, but we're a really strong partnership on that, and I bring her into this discussion in spirit when it's appropriate. Here, since you're not yet financial analysts, usually I have to declare what my affiliations are because of conflicts of interest. Of course, if you're an investor in certain areas, you want to declare that, because obviously I want to make sure that my investments actually return profits and have impacts as well. And for this audience, I'm not going to go into this part, but really go into the framing piece. So like Peter suggested, I have three main topics here to share, and I pause after each one or in between as we go along. The first one is a little bit more of a personal story and the framing of how I see things really developing, and the global motivation of why we do what we do. And then I can go as deep as possible or desirable in a portfolio approach of investing. And I start out fairly high level, sharing with you the principles using the financial language, so that because we are being challenged as impact investors, that what we do is impossible, namely combining impact and financial returns. And I just don't buy that, and now we have the proof points that it is indeed possible to do that, and I focus on that message for you today. And then I elevate in the last part of the discussion here my comments and the discussion again to what does that mean from the trends as I see them, and how we can actually participate. How can you choose to participate, if you choose, in these trends in your career and in your personal lives? So that is the frame. So to me, the defining challenge of humanity in the 21st century is to combine sustainable development while respecting the resource constraints on the planet. And so holistic sustainability that encompasses that issue is the defining issue of humanity. And it's easier to do just one without the other, and capitalism, as it is, arguably, can provide some sustainable development for humans very effectively, but it does that a lot of time at the expense of holistic sustainability, at the expense of the resources. And the macroeconomists conveniently call that externalities, and they're okay in not challenging the system of how to make them internalities such that the system actually supports holistic sustainability. And I will show you how we can migrate finance, the financial system, over time to actually do that. And we cannot accept that notion anymore. And you need to understand the system, how it works, in order to change it, right? And that's why I'm talking to you. If you think about the megatrends, it's no secret that the world will have 9 billion people on the planet. That's already done. You cannot really change that short of a catastrophe, right? And that means that the resources that we have are going to have to be managed differently than right now, including how capital is deployed to that. You know, to me, it's very strange that the best minds in the universities, you know, pretend that a system that was invented 150 years ago for a population of 1.2 billion people, in the context of seemingly unlimited resources, would not have to be rethought in the context of global constraints and 9 billion people. I mean, of course it has to be rethought. And so what I'm talking about is not something strange or weird, it's just where we need to move anyway. So humanity needs to figure out in the next 30 years how to do that. And so let's keep working on that as opposed to pretending that it doesn't happen. Modern portfolio theory is strange, right? Because it has 3 fundamental flaws. Yet most people continue to work on it and accept it as the fundamental principle of organizing investments. So first flaw, they pretend that all the investors are actually reasonable investors, rational investors they call them. I'm not rational, I want to have impact, right? They would call me totally irrational. I'm okay with that. I think I'm rational from where I stand, so does everybody else, but not in the context of how they think we are only interested in maximizing profits and that all of our decisions are actually geared towards that. I'm a proof that that's not true, and so are 50 colleagues of mine that I've assembled in a global network of impact investors called Tonic, which I'm going to share with you. They pretend as if we have perfect markets. There's no perfect market, and therefore the theory is wrong, right? They pretend that we don't have to care about these externalities. So it's okay to burn up the planet while maximizing shareholder value. It's okay, okay? Why is that okay? I don't get it, right? So why can't we challenge the system that that's not okay? You know, in the US, we have a big debate going on about the tar sands in Canada, and people pretend that because it's inevitable, therefore it will have to happen. So I don't buy into this inevitability anymore, right? I say, no, I'm going to say no to that. Of course, I'm not going to put money into that, and I'm not supporting it. And I'm going to be vocal about this. I'm going to speak up about this. The financial system is built around efficiency. My PhD is in resiliency, in big transaction systems that would actually work in the context of failures. I built one of the biggest ones called Ariba in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I deployed these principles of resiliency into the systems that I built. And it's still around, bought up by SAP for $4.5 billion. They could have had it cheaper, by the way, because when I talked to Hasso Plattner in the late 90s about doing a partnership, you know, but you know what he said to us? He said, Charlie and Keith, my CEO at that point in time, he said, you know, we SAP, we built the car. You, Ariba, you can build the radio, and I'm going to play the music on your radio. So I said, hey, Keith, did you just hear what he said? I don't think we have a partnership here. You know, at that point in time, we might have done it for, you know, maybe $1 billion. And so he bought it back at $4.5 billion. It was a nice exit, but exits are important for impact, and we need to figure out, you know, how to do these exits. So I was intrigued by The Economist of May 30, 2011, where they declared that the new era has dawned on humanity, and they call it the Anthropocene. And what they mean by that is that for the first time, humanity is in a position to actually have substantial impact on the ecological resources on a planetary scale. And that this epoch, so to speak, you know, started with the Industrial Revolution. So since we now have such a huge impact on the ecological footprint of the world, we need to reflect on what that means from the financial system, right? Capitalism as it is, and all the other systems as well, macroeconomy. And I very much respect the work going on in Oakland by a Swiss guy, a friend of mine now, who is doing the Global Footprint Network, who elaborates on the regenerative capacity of resources on a planetary scale vis-a-vis the usage of how we use these resources. And he explains convincingly, which is now being used even in conjunction by nations in conjunction with measuring the GDP, right, that we are about 50% overshoot today in using resources on a planetary scale, that 50% of them are not regenerated on a regular basis right now. And if we don't change the system, we're on a bad path. I'm not going to talk about the bad path because that's, that's really not very exciting. I'm going to talk about the good path and how we are actually going to go there because we have to go there anyway. So, we have this debate, particularly in the US, always between right and left, and okay, I don't really understand that debate, frankly, and because in the future, the debate will really be about people who understand that we need to have sustainability on the resources and people who don't. And what that means from a cradle-to-cradle process perspective, from how we deploy capital, how we measure impact, what we cannot accept anymore, right? And things that are acceptable today will clearly not be acceptable in a few years because they cannot be acceptable. And so let's just, do this as we go along. So investment, I want to make the case to you today that investments are a major component of changing the system, of making that transformation. And in the end, we could discuss, that's just the beginning of the transformation. What do we need to do later, that's going to come? Because I can already see it. But in order to convince the finance folks, we need to speak their language, right? So I'm going to cast it in that language because otherwise they think I'm too Californian in my arguments. Yeah. So, but I do want to make it a little bit more personal and then pause a little bit and say, why is it that I'm doing this and we are doing that, Lisa and I are doing that? Well, I just made the argument, hopefully convincingly to you, that I believe that the holistic sustainability is an issue, and therefore, I believe we need to align everything that we do to partially alleviating that issue, to helping alleviate that issue. And because once that you understand, what the issues are, if you don't actually positively contribute, that might not be actually a good thing for you to do if you don't do something that you believe in. And so we align what we do with our values, and our values, are holistic sustainability. And we take an entrepreneurial approach. So most of the things that I did in my life, I could not be a politician because I would never get 51% of the people agreeing with the things that I work on. As a matter of fact, most people say you're going to fail.
So now you're working on 15%.
Yeah,
Would that be enough?
But so if I tell you the 3 companies that I worked for where everybody said you cannot be successful, they all were successful in the end, right? And so I think it would be strange for me if 51% would actually agree with me in what I work on, because then it would show me that maybe it's not that impactful in the end. So briefly, I did grow up here, but then, okay, I did not put that in the Hawaii slides because that one is an interesting one. So I was fairly incompatible with my family, with my dad at the time, and so I had to leave Innsbruck, and so I actually applied for the American Field Service Scholarship, and you cannot really. I'm very much different now than I was 10 years ago when I thought I was controlling the outcome of my life. I don't really, but I set intentions, and I set the intention back then to go to the US, and miraculously, they sent me to Maui, to Hawaii. And
bad luck, right?
Yeah, so it's and the most impactful thing that happened there is that I met Lisa, right? And we got married a few years later, and we just had our 30th wedding anniversary. But I've met her in 1974, and I studied there. Surfing and other activities, which really are very impactful too. You cannot just study, what they say are numbers, and so. But then I had to go back and went to Vienna and studied computer science, and I would argue that I was an okay PhD, but not really the best. I know that, so it's okay. But I did the PhD on these big systems, and I deployed it. Actually, I used it a lot, and so it was very useful on that level. And when Lisa suggested that we would go to the US because she could not find an adequate entrepreneurial job in Austria, being a non-Austrian woman, an architect, and trying to figure out how to do architecture in Austria at that point in time was impossible. The common system, and I don't even know how it works, right? But it really prevents things to happen here. And so we decided, let's go somewhere where it's not that complicated to do things. And we did go to Silicon Valley. Here you see San Jose on the left side, Stanford campus, and Golden Gate Bridge. And had a very successful career. And I think Silicon Valley is great if you want to do technology and all that. If you want to actually make an impact, it's good to move a little bit away, because the impact as they measure it is doing the coolest technology, with the biggest technology impact, which is cool, but not sufficient from a human life perspective, at least not for mine. And so we decided to move to Big Sur, and you see our house there, and one of the oldest trees on our property, we call it the holy tree. Recently had an arborist come up and said, "How old is this tree?" And he said, "Well, between 800 and 1300 years." And he said, "Do you want me to tell you exactly how old? I would have to drill a hole." I said, "No, let's not do that. It's good. I say it's just about 1,000 years. That works for me. Yeah, fair enough." So that move in locations was accompanied also by moves in companies. So I started out at TU Wien, and Hewlett-Packard brought us over, and Digital Equipment Corporation. Nobody knows about that one anymore. And then went to startups. And the first startup that I did was Next, and joined Steve Jobs' team after he was booted out of Apple. He founded Next. And I was in charge of the operating system. And when Steve took over Apple again in 1998, he made OpenStep, which is the Next operating system, System 10, and implemented System 10 on that. And so when my son's Alex's company was recently bought out by Apple, I said, "Alex, check out the bug database of the current operating system. You will see my name all over it." He said, "No, I don't believe that." I said, "Well, check it out." And sure enough, there's a lot. We had like 15,000 bugs in that bug database. Even then, I'm sure they didn't clean up all 15,000. Right?
Yeah, that was quite.
Yeah, so he actually found that in there. So I was, he said, "Okay, you really work there, and it's true." So good. Checked on it, right?
Right.
Kids keep you honest.
You were working with Steve Jobs. What was his attitude to your bugs?
Oh, well, it depends what bugs. Actually, at that point in time, outsourcing was the craze. And I said, "Steve, should we outsource to India? Everybody else is outsourcing QA." And he said, "Charlie, tell me one thing. The bugs that are really the hardest ones, that you sweat over, that you actually get called, who fixes these bugs?" And I said, "Well, engineers fix them." "Oh, you mean not your QA department?" I said, "Yes, because they don't know how to fix these bugs, because they're very hard to fix, right, and find." And he said, "Well, that's your answer. Don't outsource." So, but he was pretty black and white on some of these thoughts. And then moved on to Right Point, and which was data mine, and we sold it to Epiphany in 98 for $400 million, and then onwards to Ariba, and Ariba was just sold at, like I said, for $4.5 billion, and it was great because I was doing very innovative stuff and worked 100 hours a week, and it was very impactful on one level. But it really, what that did is it did create a lot of wealth for our shareholders, and since I owned 2% of the company, and it was, you do the math, it created quite a bit of wealth for ourselves, which led us to now work on impact. And the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is the KL Felicitas Foundation, which is an instantiation of our work and impact our own foundation. And maybe just stop here a little bit, and before we go into that, and see if there's any questions or comments, or make it a little bit more interactive. It's okay to ask, and then I move into the financial portfolio story.
So do you have any questions? I'm going to start with the first one. May I? How much time did it take you from leaving Ariba to starting your impact activities? Was that the next day?
No. That's a good question, because now looking back, sometimes it looks like it was an instantaneous enlightenment. It was not. And so when I left in 2002, I didn't plan to leave, and so the first half year I was just cleaning up. And cleaning up email. I had 5,000 emails, and I still worked for them, but not officially, right? And handed off all my stuff. And the only thing I did is I always said no. I said everybody wanted to, at that point in time, everybody loved me because I was so successful, right? So I got great job offers. And you do Google, Europe, you do the CEO here and there. And I just was wise enough to say no. And because I didn't know what I really wanted to to do yet. I just knew that I didn't want to be a CTO when I'm 55, and people like you, much faster thinkers at that point in time than I am now, that's not a good position to be in. And so I said, okay, what should I do? We started our foundation, and I started, experimenting with yoga and meditation and reflection, and that over a couple of 3 years, convinced Lisa and I that we really wanted to do something impactful with the wealth that came our way, and that was the beginning of the impact strategy that I'm going to share now. That looks easy looking back, but it was a longer process.
Longer process,
Yeah.
also together with Lisa.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Pirmin, you had
It was
the
good,
first
because if
question.
you don't do that together with your partner, then you get divorced, most likely, if one is much more ahead than the other. Yeah.
Well, I have quite an easy question, actually. Was there a special event that triggered now pursuing this path of impact? Because you did big companies, then you did Starbucks, and you seem to make a lot of money with it. And I'm just wondering why you didn't continue with being innovative startups, or are you still doing that, and what drove you to doing this impact portfolio?
Yeah. So really, there's two streams going on. One is the realization of what I shared in the first few moments of my talk, and that's really that the trajectory of the planet is not good, okay? And if you look at all the projections, right, it's not going in the right direction. And Lisa and I want to make a contribution, to a positive contribution in not making, the planet an unlivable planet in the next few decades. The other one was a personal transformation that I just alluded to a little bit, right, that reinforced the first one a little bit. And to me, it's really a question, for the future, maybe, if personal transformation comes together with, having an impactful life, or vice versa, how can we capture that? I bet if I ask each one of you, do you want to lead an impactful life? You'll probably say yes, right? I mean, you want to. Most people do. And then you say, okay, what does that mean? And so if you happen to have 100 million, and you say, how do you make them impactful? It's not that straightforward, okay? Because you go to the philanthropist and they say, oh, well, you just give out money. Well, is giving out money impactful? Maybe, maybe not. When I look at the philanthropy and how it worked and what impact it had, in my opinion, it failed. Okay? It creates dependencies. It creates bureaucracies. It does not tie in the grantee in a sustainable way into a process that's sustainable, and therefore, in my book, that's called a failure. And so I could not possibly do classical philanthropy, right? Because since I consider it a failure, I cannot do it. It will not be true to my values, right? And so you see that these two things conspired. And so once then, if you say you want to have an impactful life, and you ask the following questions, then you say, what career do you want to have? Whom do you want to work with, right? Because I don't want to work with anybody who is not aligned in making a positive impact. And so if somebody approaches me and says, Charlie, I want to do partnership with you, and they want to maximize their financial return, I say, no, do whatever you think is right. I don't challenge you on that, but it's not what I do. And so that that is really, and wealth is something really interesting, because I check with my doctor every year. Hopefully, I only have to go every year, and I say, Dr. Emma, how are your clients doing, right? Because I always check what's going on. And she said in 2010, after the big disaster in the financial markets, she said, Charlie, you don't believe what I just saw.
Everybody's ill.
Yeah, no, a patient of mine who had to downscale from 2 private jets to 1 private jet.
Okay.
He's physically sick. I have no sympathy with this guy, by the way, she says, right? Because that's not a disaster. But I tell you, Charlie, he's physically sick. He does not pretend to be sick, right?
All right.
So what that means, that most wealthy people get physically sick if they just think about losing their wealth. So their whole motivation is to try not to lose their wealth, right? Most people. And they then augment some status symbols here and there, and they don't want to lose those. And so you see that most time wealth is actually a curse, because it prevents you from not leading a fearful life, which is an awful way to lead your life, right? If you're always in fear that you lose something, that doesn't work. So if you meditate a little bit and do a little bit of yoga and reflect a little bit, you will see that that's not a good life to lead, and therefore you do it differently. And so I would challenge you, each one of you, to reflect on your lives, sufficiently enough to figure out what impact means for you. And it means that something very different for everybody. And nobody should judge somebody else's impact. It's a personal choice of who you are, what you bring to the table, what you want to do, what you're passionate about, and all of that together.
Yeah, it's probably a rather European question, but as you have a foot in both worlds, I
Yeah.
would really be interested to know, where do you find any room for public policies?
Oh, public policies. So I think public policies are as important, as bottom-up or private investments and what have you. And I personally don't work much in public policies. I have friends and other people who work on that. But they obviously you need to have the right framework in order to do meaningful and impactful work. One example would be, I think here in Austria, I would change the law of incorporation for Stiftungen, because they are right now a tax haven as opposed to a vehicle for doing meaningful impact investments. And so that's a policy work that if I lived here, I would try to figure out how to do that. For instance, that's just one instance. I would, on the health side, right, I would figure out how to do private-public partnerships. I'm working in India a lot, and there without public policy on health, there's no scalability possible to really have decent health services for most of the Indians, for instance, right? And so those are just two examples, seemingly random examples of where public policy is absolutely necessary, to be a partner in that. And when I talk a little bit more about some of the investments that we do, there's some that explicitly have that. I just do a preview as we go very interactively and don't talk about this later. One very great example, since I just come from London, is the social impact bond work in the UK. And it's the first financial instrument where actually it's a three-way partnership between impact investors, NGOs, and the British government, that is. And what it does, it actually rewards the impact investors with more financial return if the social impact is higher. The social impact that this investment, the first one, wants to have is reduce the recidivism rate of offenders. So imprisoned male people, probably in this one, when they get released from prison, within 12 months, 40% of them are back in prison. So if you could do an intervention where you halve that to 20%, the state and the taxpayer, independent of the prisoners, would save a lot of money. So you can put a money target on that, how much it costs the taxpayer for that person to be imprisoned again. And so the bank that we give the money to, they work with NGOs who know how to do drug abuse programs, who know how to do alcohol abuse programs, who do job training and all that, but they never got a predictable money stream, to do that preventative stretch. And now we say, we give you that money through this bank, and if you manage it correctly, and we watch it, because if you don't, I lose my money. If they do, like I said, and then the government actually pays us impact investors up to 13%. So these are new public-private partnerships that I'm very excited about, because for the first time, you actually combine social impact with the financial return, right? And I'm glad to tell you that I just talked to the CEO of that effort, and he said there's 14 additional programs now going on. And so we're first movers with our capital, because most capital cannot come in if it's not proven, right? And our capital can come in because we're entrepreneurial and make that point. And one of our successes is if more capital flows into these successful models. We'll talk about that maybe later too.
Yeah, we still have one question.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
One question
Hi.
too.
Alexander.
According to these startups, when you do all the startups, I can imagine as a manager, you have to get the information from all the sources, and you can't be an expert in anything. So
You can't be what?
an expert in anything. So how do you decide where to lie the focus, and what's your green path? What helps you?
Okay, that's a nice open-ended question. And in a startup, of course, so if you're part of a small startup team, maybe the founding team or right after, right, you try to assemble, the first thing is you have to assemble the right founding team, right? And what that means is that if you are a sole founder, for instance, you are highly less likely to be successful than if you have a founding team of 3 or 4. Which shows that you should actually try to find co-founders that complement you. And usually, you want to have one person who is outward focused, who knows how to do sales or development of sales channels, marketing type of person as well. And if it's a product game that needs technology, they need technologists, right, that complement each other. So those are the minimum, I think, people that you need to have on board. And then you need to figure out immediately, let's assume that you have a business idea and that you need to raise money for that. Then you need to, convince people with money to invest in you, and that requires that you actually present a coherent picture about the opportunity. And so you need to have somebody. If you have done that before, that helps, because then you have more credibility. If you haven't done it before, then you need to bootstrap yourself into that. And then, I don't know how to be more specific about, what you need to do, but, that's your question, but then you need to execute, right? Yeah. If you have multiple investments, you mean? And how to manage the investments from that perspective? Oh, okay. That's a very different question. So sorry, I didn't understand your question. So we do invest in startup companies. So that's, and social enterprises, about 12 of them. And if it's seed stage investments, then just the reciprocity of what I said is the most important thing. I need to see and talk to the entrepreneur. I would not invest in any business that I don't know personally on that level, the entrepreneur, because you invest in the entrepreneur at that point in time, right? And because the business model is not robust enough yet, they don't really have not any track record in making money and all of that. If it's a little bit more in the growth phase, then you not only look at the team and the leadership, but also at the business model and how they can get, to maybe cash flow break even. In the social side, sometimes people don't know how to read a balance sheet and a P&L, so it's a lot of work to educate them on that, and they don't have the chance to go to MCI to learn that, right? And so it's a lot of hand-holding and mentoring, and on that level. So it's very difficult to mentor pure social entrepreneurs who are not really entrepreneurs from a financial standpoint. It takes much longer, but the ones that are actually financially trained, they do all the things that they do with normal entrepreneurs. And then I go on the board, or I need to have somebody on the board whom I trust, because I need to be able to call up at any point in time somebody who knows what's going on. And in 1 or 2 or 3, we're very active. So I can, I'm the board chair of HealthPoint Services, which is an interesting one, where I represent capital that we invested. So HealthPoint Services invests in rural India and provides 4 services: access to clean water, access to doctors, access to diagnostics, and access to pharmaceuticals, right? And recently I had to split the company into 2 because we couldn't figure out how to do how to make the health services go to profitability. And believe me, you're not able to raise money if you don't have a plan to go to profitability, for-profit money. It doesn't work, right? And so I split it up into 2 companies, into a water company, which is profitable, and I just raised $3.5 million in debt, which should show you that I have the cash flow to actually service that debt in the future, and put the health company into not-for-profit. So you see that we get quite involved on that level to help it become successful. Otherwise, it might have tanked, right? Maybe not. So, okay.
Yeah. So I think the very interesting part is that's what I've also learned in San Francisco, that investors really focus much more on the person than on the business plan and all that jazz. Yeah. At the very first beginning, most investors which I was talking to, just like you said, okay, I'm looking at the bright person, and if I believe and trust this person, he can fail or she can fail, it's all right. Yeah. Failure is perhaps also something which is very interesting. Yeah. In the US American culture is perhaps not that stress as we have it here in Europe. Once you
failure is a badge of honor, because you failed. You need to fail fast and not fail the same way twice. But if you fail, because you tried something out, then that's a good thing. And because mediocrity is like the alternative, and that's not an option for, at least not in Silicon Valley. You fail and you do something else, or you succeed, right? And go on. Now, in the social sector, that's not a concept that's embraced totally. And it's succession planning is even not embraced. So I mean, when we made the investment, when CrossPoint Ventures and Benchmark invested in Ariba, of course they talked to me and said, Charlie, if you don't scale then we take you out and you get an exit package. And that's a normal conversation. I said, of course, just give me a chance to scale. And if I don't, then you give me a nice exit package. And if I do, then you leave me in, right? And so it's a normal conversation to have when you bring in money. You should see the social entrepreneurs, how offended they are to even talk about this. Oh, you want to replace me? You're a bad investor, right? It's like, you need to educate the social entrepreneurs on that too, because most people don't scale. I was a little bit the exception, because at that point in time, I had organizations, line managed 100 people, and at the end I managed 1,000 people, which, most people don't scale that way. Yeah. And but the business models will have to morph, because you have to have a believable business strategy initially, but you need to have the flexibility of adjust to the real world, like I had to adjust HealthPoint services to the real world, where you need to make these business decisions. And if an entrepreneur actually is not willing to make these business decisions, that's what I need to check. Are you willing to be flexible and learn fast, right, and fail fast if necessary? That's what I check out when I check out the seed stage opportunities.
All right. So perhaps we should come
Move
back
on.
to the next chapter.
Yeah, next chapter. That's right. And so, impact portfolios. Our foundation our foundation's mission is to enable social entrepreneurs to be more impactful. And the second motivation is to actually advocate the approach that I'm sharing with you in the next 15, 20 minutes, the 100% impact approach. The reason we do this is because of the following reason. They call it theory of change in the philanthropy world. Our theory of change is that if we can show that a portfolio of $50 million can be impactful and get competitive financial returns, that other portfolios will follow in the multiple $100 million range. And if in the next 3 to 5 years, we inspire half a dozen of portfolio managers in that range to become impactful, I would consider that success. And because if they are successful, then 3 to 5 years after that, we could actually explain to the pension fund managers that you can actually do this, and we could put regulatory pressure on the pension fund managers that they would actually be held accountable for impact as well. Right now, the regulatory framework cannot do that yet, because the pension fund managers can say it's not a proven model yet, and it's too risky. So they always come back and say, so if you actually, ask somebody who expects a pension, and you frame the question to the future pensioner, and say, hey, Mr. Pension Man, future pension man, do you actually want to have a pension at the expense of your kids' lives or your grandkids? Do you want to have your pension fund invested in stuff that creates problems for your grandkids? They all say, no, I don't. So they go back to the pension fund manager and say, here, pension fund manager, don't do that. But the pension fund manager says, well, you don't know what you're talking about, because if you ask me to invest in these things, they're much more risky, and you will not get your pension. And then the poor pension guy says, oh, I don't want that either, right? And they get it, and they don't have the vocabulary to push back and say, as a matter of fact, no, you should not invest in climate change, right? And I show you what we invest in, and it's positive, And in the U.S., the endowments actually, Peter, they start questioning, the students start questioning the endowments of their universities, which is not the model here, but more in the US, where the students say, hey, dear endowment manager of the university that I pay a lot of money to go to, I don't want you to invest in climate change anymore, right? Because I don't believe we should. And so they start saying, okay, should we not invest in Chevron and the worst offenders? Let's take the worst offenders out. Impact investors, that's the first reaction. Let's not do the bad things. Let's not invest in pornography. Let's not invest in weapons. And now let's not invest in climate change. But that's not good enough as a positive impact, right? You just take out the worst offenders, you don't make a positive contribution. And so we go one step beyond that and say, okay, we cannot invest in the old industry of extracting carbons because it messes up the planet, right? We know that, and therefore we cannot invest in any of that. Now, but then you say, well, maybe we should do something positive, right? And we invest in biodiversity and renewable timber and the water and carbon offsets and all. So that's a big debate going on in that. If the alums actually, who fund these things, if they would speak up, that's and if the pensioners would speak up everywhere on the planet, right? Saying we don't accept this anymore. Well, that would put pressure on the system, right? That we need to do. And then the regular framework would be coming in and saying that.
Yeah, but still you need proven cases where you can really see that you earn money. And
this is the case.
Good enough. And
here we go.
Okay.
All right. So what is impact investing? Impact investing, simple definition, intentional investment with positive impact where you want to have a financial return. And you want to have either more or less financial return, but you do want to have a financial return. It's not giving out money, and it's intentional. You want to have a positive impact. That's what it is. You know, people always say there's no opportunity to invest in that. It's not true. In all asset classes, be that cash, public equity, hedge funds, real estate, commodities, if you say you care about climate change, you can adjust your portfolio to only invest in alleviating partially, living with the consequences of climate change or whatever.
And do you invest in all asset classes?
Yes. So this is the asset allocation that we have. We share that. It's all public knowledge because people say you cannot do that. And so we use an asset class. Here's our asset class allocation, the current allocation, current and committed, long term. I'm not here to talk about asset class allocation. I just tell you that we use the tools and sub-asset classes. And you see that we even have one hedge fund in there. And I wish, I talked to the hedge fund guys and say, why don't you come up with a hedge fund that really works on these global trends on sustainability? And I think they're thinking about it now, right? Okay. And that's good. Right now we have one hedge fund that shorts the non-sustainable, enterprises, which is great because they should go under, and I want to make money if they go under, right? So that's aligned. It's impact. And then maybe others learn. That's the one hedge fund that we have. So on the, like I just told you about the portfolios as an example, we cannot invest in gold and extractives because we know that in our book it messes up the planet, and therefore we invest in these beautiful companies that do biodiversity, water, in all asset classes. And if you know that the big banks actually, finance the coal industry, so Bank of America in the US, they finance the coal industry, so we don't believe, we cannot finance the coal because we don't believe in coal, right? And the lack of transparency is just appalling. I don't understand why people think that I can give them money and they don't tell me what they invested in. It's a strange concept. You should ask your bank here, what do you do with my money, with my cash? Because if it turns out that they invest in weapons and you don't want to have them invest in weapons, or they do something that you disagree with, you should not give them their money, but somebody else. Yeah. And there's GLS Bank and others that really are transparent with what they do with their money, and we demand that. And fortunately for us, there's lots of great banks available that support the local industry. I get the same, there's no more risk that I take, right? I get the same, unless the US government goes upside down, which it could be in the future, but then all banks are going to be impacted, not just these banks, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And unless you invest in a Greek bank, maybe that's a little bit more challenging these days, but normally the states stand behind the banks. And here's just all the investments that we have done in different cash positions. And fixed income, similarly, I talked about social finance, right? That we invested in. Impact Assets is an intermediary that provides an impact platform for donor-advised funds. Media Development Loan Fund provides loans to media media efforts all over the world that would not get capitalized by their normal banking system because they actually, criticize their governments. And so usually in a government that doesn't want to be criticized, they usually also don't allow you, they manage their banks and tell them not to lend money to their critics, and therefore they don't have access to capital. We believe, that transparency is important, so we give Media Development Loan Fund our money, and they provide us with 4 or 5%, interest. Interest. Yeah. And we invest. So these are so impact portfolio approach on the seed stage. That's what I talked about. So hopefully by now you know that a portfolio, well, you probably know, a portfolio is not only about seed stage angel investments, but we do these seed stage angel investments, and here's the ones that we invest in. One that we could maybe key off later is what one year ago I was getting intrigued more by crowdfunding and crowdsourcing platforms. So I did a 360 about what was available at that point in time, and we decided to invest in purpose.com. Right. Out of the East Coast, and they're doing really interesting campaigns. And they also support Audi, and so the impact due diligence was interesting because they not only have really impactful campaigns like lobbying against the Ugandan government, imposing a homophobic law in, that would be awful for gay people there, right? All the way, but they also work for Audi, which is not as impactful, right? So but they want to go in that direction. So we have an opportunity to work with them and advising them from our perspective of how they could be even more impactful while they make their money, right? So a good partnership, it's a collaboration. And then, so then the quarterly discussions that we have with our investment advisor is we look at the asset class and say, are we 100% impact or not in each asset class? And if you look into this, if we find an emerging market, that's the yellow bar there, that's not impactful yet, if this year we find an impactful emerging market manager, then we will pretty much be 100%. And I hope we do. So we are very transparent about all the investments that we make in each asset class. And you have these slides available if you want to look into them and want to look more into that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today on that. But you see in each one, all the investments. Let me just check on I want to maybe fast forward on this a little bit and then stop a little bit. So this concludes a little bit the asset allocation model. I've used all the language of conventional portfolio management. I've not touched on any impact jargon almost, right? Except that I claim that I have the impact in all my investments, which I show you some measurements about how we do that. We use a different categorization because you say, okay, Charlie, I'm really interested in helping girls have a great education in Southern Sudan. Well, there's no fund that says I invest in in girls in Southern Sudan. So you don't find an investment exactly that supports your mission, right? And so then people get stuck and say, what should I do? Because I really care about this. And so we encourage people then to take a bigger view. Why do they care about girls in Sudan? Maybe because they care about women's education, maybe women empowerment, maybe human rights, right? And as you draw your circles a little bit wider, you will find investments in that. And so we use another categorization, which is impact first, which is the bullseye on impact. It has to be the impact that you define on that level. And maybe since we define our impact on the foundation side as helping social enterprises grow, there's a lot of social enterprises around, right? So we can invest in all of those, and that would be impact first in our terminology here. Now, thematic is more the themes that I mentioned before, right? So we also care about sustainability. It's not the core mission of our foundation, but we care about this, and so we enable our investment advisors not only to find deal flow in social enterprises, but in sustainability as well, because that's part of our value system, right? And sustainable is actually here as a category. And responsibly, we don't do that anymore. That's a jargon for passive screening, which we don't like. And so you see how you can actually create a portfolio from a different perspective in all asset classes by going inside out, starting with what you really care, figuring out where the deal flow is, and then reflecting on what other things you might care about, and that's how we build that. Okay, and we're almost to 100%, and now let me conclude this part of the remarks with the financial slides. And so we are almost ready to publish a report on this, and this is 5-year audited results from 2005, 2011. I'm still waiting for the 2012 reports, which are delayed, which we're going to add to that. And then we offer an analysis, which I don't go into a lot of detail today, but show you the highlights, to the community. That's the point that I made before. Here you have a $50 million portfolio, right? And here's audited results on the financial return, while we went from 30% impact to 70% impact, right? And now to 100% impact. And so I just tell you a couple of highlights. That the top line is our global portfolio's financial return. And then we compare it in this instance to two benchmarks. One is a 60% MSCI World, 40% Barclay, 60 global equity, 40 global bonds. You can see a couple of things. This is 2008 and 2009 here. You see big dips going on all over the place. Ours didn't dip as much, right, compared to the benchmark. And when you drill in, it's because of the impact investments. Okay. There are 3 types of investments that acted as a huge hedge, against the downturn of 2008, 2009. The first one was microfinancing investments that we have done. We have invested in maybe 3 or 4 microfinancing institutions. And microfinancing at that point in time was not coupled to the global financial system. It was not coupled to the subprime crisis, and therefore it was totally uncorrelated with all the other asset classes, right? The other one was social enterprises, the ones that I just talked about before, because they're also not integrated into the global system, and therefore they were also decoupled from all asset classes that converged in that risk moment to the total correlation, where modern portfolio theory also breaks down, right? And so that's another reason. So if I want to make the fear-based argument, which I could teach you how to do that, right, is, well, if you want to hedge against the next downturn, here is a hedge, but that's not good enough for us impact investors. And then if you actually, take out these very risky small investments that we do in seed stage funds, where we are willing to not make competitive financial returns, where we are willing to knowingly lose money, right? Then this is even more pronounced. And when you actually, so the final thought is again all conventional theory. And I'm almost feel guilty, saying that, because I don't believe in it on one level, but it works. And what I mean by that is when you compare the returns, then we're slightly better than one benchmark and slightly worse than another benchmark. But we're slightly worse than this benchmark because the standard deviation and downside deviation, which is a measure of volatility, we're much less volatile, which is actually the modern portfolio theory says, right? If you take less risk, then you are willing to take slightly less return. And so we're going to make that argument, while, if you look at the beta, you are actually also way beyond, below the portfolios. So that we're going to share a lot more analysis on this, but the points are, number one, you can construct a portfolio of impact across all asset classes that has very competitive returns and impact. Number two, that we might have discovered a way of hedging against downturns that otherwise would not happen. Oh, I forgot to mention, public-only equity was also interesting to watch, because public equity is difficult to invest as an impact investor, because they're not accountable that much to impact. And we invested in Generations Management, which was Gore and David Blood in the UK, which deployed ESG principles, environmental, social, and governmental principles pioneered by the Europeans. And we are even stricter in that, in evaluating our public equity. And what happened is, if you look into the public equity, into the three investments that we have, they also didn't go down as much, and they recovered faster, which is an indicator that actually the market understands a little bit, that's less risky than not. If you project, that's more trends then, okay. And, okay, so the question, do you need to take a haircut if you do this? Oops, did I have? No, that's the answer. So maybe pause a little bit, and maybe pause after I talk about the impact metrics, and so we have a little bit. So we do measure the impact, of course, and while not falling into the same trap as the financial folks in confusing a few metrics with what's really going on. Yeah. So you're in this absurd position where the financial community criticizes you for not having good metrics, while they believe their metrics are any good. So they say that PE ratios and stuff is actually a proxy for reality, and they actually believe it, right? So we cannot really fall into the same trap. And so what we do is quantitative metrics, qualitative metrics, and stories. And because a lot of times the metrics themselves do not convey the whole story of impact. And so it's okay to have soft stories to complement. Not only okay, it's necessary. Actually, the human experience is about storytelling, and the financial analysts in their stupidity, forget about that.
Which is also a new approach, right?
Yeah.
The story, the integration of the story.
Yeah, the innovation of the story.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not going to go into detail here, but stop.
To be honest, we can't. We're a bit running out of time.
We are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I stop here now, and
perhaps if we just could briefly discuss trends, which is
the trends. Okay.
Is that,
but any comments
point and questions?
Any comments about the portfolio, because the trend is going to go into different direction. Yeah.
Are you thinking that you're more or less providing a shift in paradigm, or
Very good question. I want to do both. And so what this exercise is about is to actually enable people to start moving into this without realizing that that's a shift of paradigm. And because I cast it in the conventional terminology. And because the shift of paradigm will require a little bit more work and education and awareness building and all of that. And so, does that answer enough, or should I drill into more the second part?
There was one question. I do have another one.
Yeah. Because ultimately it has to be a shift in paradigm, right? And because that's not sufficient in order to be sustainable itself. Because if you only invest in this, without really taking the long-term trends into account, so you need to go beyond short-term transactions, for instance. You need to be able, so you need to be a responsible owner of your investments, not have the algorithms be the responsible owners. So that's not reflected in those thoughts yet. And in the trends, I have one slide, I think, that summarizes that thinking about 5 bullet items of what the paradigm shift would have to encompass on top of what I just said, more than what I just said, okay? Yeah. About this part, yeah. Yeah.
There are quite sophisticated methods to measure the impact of public health policies, for example, but they're very expensive to build and to run. So what do you do? Do you have a control group somewhere, or historical controls? Or?
Yeah, so the impact measurement could be a whole topic for a whole seminar, right? Because it is so I try to give you some ideas, but I will not do it justice in just 2 minutes. But how do you prove? So I think package into your question is, how do you prove your impact? And a lot of times, the existing community would say you have to do a controlled study group in order to prove it, right? And that's the outputs as opposed to the outcomes, the metrics. And I don't, I'm not a big believer in this, and because I also fundamentally think that the science behind that is flawed, and that this obsession with causality, where you have to prove that you're not influencing, that the observer doesn't influence the observed, is actually the wrong paradigm. I don't have a better paradigm instead of, but I don't believe we should hire these legions of consultants who just want to, be paid, and then you can prove to a community that I frankly don't care about, that my intervention actually did the impact that I had. So we don't do that. And if people want to pay for that, that's okay. I don't think it adds to it. I think what adds to it is actually the qualitative assessment in conjunction with the quantitative assessment, and that we cast that together and then do that. So a lot more depth to that, that we could discuss. In the end, I tell you a story that exemplifies my thinking on that. So Google is obsessed with data, right? Google as a company. And the guy who worked on the impact assessment tool at one point in time worked for Google. And I just talked to him recently, and he said about impact measurements, because he's an expert in that, right? And he said, so he was more, he was more rational. He's an engineer, saying let's prove it and all that. And so Google was trying to figure out where to build their next support center on the East Coast. So he did all the analysis of various different data streams of where they should go. In the end, Larry Page, that is, made a decision to go to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and this guy was blown away. He said, Larry, you can't do that. All the data. No, because I know, this is my alma mater. I know the people. I know that it's doable, it's feasible. So he made a gut-level decision, Google, on that level. And I think that we need to go back to that level of measurement, including that. Now, the financial industry does not want to hear that, right? Because it's sort of counter.
Governments don't either.
Yeah, governments, so they will have to, ultimately. Okay, one more question maybe? Yeah.
Do you have a single number that represents impact on your whole portfolio?
No, we have across the portfolio, we measure six metrics. Two of them are social or impact, and 4 are actually financial metrics, because we think that a lot of financial metrics are a leading indicator of bigger impact downstream. And so that's, you can see that iris indicators, impact metric here, those are the ones, portfolio metrics.
And time-wise, short-term, long-term?
Every year, yeah. And so these are the metrics that we use: number of clients, jobs created, and then direct investments, new investment capital, blended capital. You see, I look at at the blend of capital over time, if it moves from grants to more commercial capital over time, I think that's a leading indicator. We have only 3 years of data now, right? And in 2 years, we have 5 years of data. At that point in time, I might be able to make my case more forcefully. We have, the tonic network of impact investors that starts using the same methodology. And so in 3 years, we'll have a lot more data, on that level as well. And okay, so let's move on to the trends. And then,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, innovations, spending capital, okay. So it is important for us to understand that this ecosystem of impact investments is being developed as we speak. It's not going to be around, it's not in the future, it is actually here. Now, the mainstream does not really acknowledge this yet for obvious reasons, but I can see for the retail investor, meaning people who can invest, 25 euros and up, more and more platforms coming up, particularly in the crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, where people, have an opportunity to participate on the investments from that perspective. In the US, we just had the first lending platform for solar installations approved by the SEC, and that's called Mosaic. They're off and running. I predict there's going to be 6 or half a dozen to a dozen of them coming up. In Europe, you have in the UK, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands already, platforms on that level. If you talk about, the high net worth individuals, small foundations, small institutional capital, next door we have Social Venture Fund out of Munich, Bone Venture out of Munich, which I'm going to see later this month to compare notes on that. So in Europe, there's quite a bit of activity going on the social fund side as well, and of course all over the world. Intermediaries are coming up also all over the world that we have, instead of merchant banks, you have impact merchant banks. So the deal that I explained to you that I'm working on HealthPoint, I don't give it to Goldman Sachs or I cannot, because they're not in my paradigm, right? And so I give it to oh, they're not in impact assets. No, they're not here. Impact capital. They're on a different slide. To total impact advisors, wherever they are. They should show up here somewhere. I actually don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but just tell you that for the first time last year, we had funds coming up, global funds that are capitalized with more than $75 million, which means that institutional capital actually is coming into this space. And if they are successful, then in 2 years, we're going to have multiple hundreds of millions of dollars in funds coming up that the institutional capital can go in. I reflect a lot about the supply and demand side, because if you had a total imbalance of money moving in, let's say the pension funds wanted to deploy, tens of billions of dollars today, they would not have the deal flow, right? And so we need to really create that deal flow in parallel with the money being re-allocated and the change being prepared on both sides. And as both sides develop, the intermediaries can make their businesses work, and we invest in them as well. That's a trend, right? That we impact investors need to enable our own investment infrastructure, such that when it's all said and done, the old paradigm will be dead and the new one will become the norm, and we can drop impact because it will be the normal way of doing things, right? And we just have to qualify it now to differentiate ourselves against the dying breed. Well, not quite dying yet, but the ones that...
Nevertheless, money then is very fast, right?
Yeah.
So you need the structure.
If the money moves, right? You should see how fast they react if I say I move my money. Indeed, we had to fire 2 of our investment managers because they didn't believe that we actually meant it. They thought we were joking. So I think blended capital is an important one too. So that bifurcation mindset that particularly males, because a lot of them are men in that field, buy into, and they say, just let me maximize your return and then you can give out much more, right? It's such a weird argument, I'm already so tired of it. Yet it's pervasive, and people make that argument, and they make it even with a straight face. To me, we have more and more opportunities, and I can show you examples. We could even write a book about this now, about where the combination of grants, subsidized capital, and commercial capital together has a bigger impact than one or the other alone. And incubators. I'm on my way to Vienna, to work with the Investment Ready program, which I co-founded. I co-founded the Social Impact international group because it's very difficult to enable social entrepreneurs to be investment ready. And so we use our grant capital to actually do that because you cannot make that model work, sustainably from a financial return perspective. Another example, right? Global networks. I'm very intrigued by global networks that do it differently, that have an opportunity for the first time to have regional specificity and regional customization, if you wish, and respecting the regional way of doing things while leveraging a global community of people who care, right? And Tonic is one of these networks that I co-created because it was not there yet. And it's a global platform of impact investors. And we demand radical transparency with respect to due diligence of our partners, which we post on our membership network, right? And so that anybody can, so we turn the angel network upside down. If you look at how angel networks started, you have to visit because you need to look the entrepreneur eye to eye in 30 miles radius. And so we now, for the first time, syndicate capital from all over the world into these deals by having the radical transparency, by building up trust between people who collaborate and syndicate capital on this. We've done 35 deals where more than one person, put syndicated capital in it. So it's early days, but it's growing, right? And we're expanding it into Asia, Singapore, India, now Brazil, Mexico. It's a movement, that's growing. And we're going to, and another one is the hub, which is actually managed out of Vienna. As soon as the Viennese found out that I'm Austrian, they put me on their board, right? so there's a board meeting next week. And it's also, there's 40 hubs. Hubs are spaces, physical spaces, where entrepreneurs can rent space to work. And it's already pre-qualified because only cool people go there. I'm usually the oldest one there hanging out, right? And we're going to have 200 hubs, all the way from South Johannesburg to Rio de Janeiro to Mumbai to New York to Vienna, and a very powerful member platform. They're all individual hubs. They're all, catering to their regions, very regional. Yet there is a member platform that we just use, all of us, that connects 9,000 members in a meaningful way, because most of the things that they work on, either the supply chain, the value chain, the products, the people, is global, right? Even so, you work regionally. And so another instantiation, I think, of things to come, where you go away from the old model of globalization, centralized top-down management, from either Europe or North America, to a partnership model where you agree on what the brand stands for. What do you stand for? You stand for impact, right? And you codify that into your behavior, and you manage it in a distributed way, in a way that's not dictated anymore by the us white boys in the north. And then, I talked a lot about crowdsourcing. It's an opportunity now. The marketplaces are a little bit too early for impact investments because it's way too difficult to codify the rules of these deals into a system that you can then have transaction. But you can do crowdsourcing on the entrepreneur side and crowdsourcing on the investment side, and those are the trends that are going on right now. Tonic is reaching out to the less super elitist to the elitist crowd, from $25,000 investment capital to $5,000. But that's just the first step to go to the real crowd, right? And I'm next week, I'm on the week after, I think, I'm in Zurich talking to Dweep. Dweep is a guy who implemented a platform in Switzerland with 20 members. And they invest 5,000, what do they have, Swiss francs, right, into a deal. So I aggregate them, put them into Tonic. You see, it's a nice network of networks that will then be able to participate through trust, cooperation, partnerships, and sharing, in this world. And it's going on. It's not like this. I'm talking to these guys now, right? We're doing these deals now.
Yeah. Should we call that crowd investing?
Yeah, crowd investing. And last slide, or almost last slide before I have the 5 principles, is we are actually creating a club for ourselves because there is none. And if there is none, I have to create it, and that's the 100% Impact Club. There are 11 of us on the planet that I know of right now that have committed 100% of their assets to impact, and I'm going to roll this out at SOCAP in September. And we have aggregated capital of $1.6 billion. So now I can start talking to the industry about, I need more deal flow on commodities. If I actually can have 70 million, to offer to somebody who knows how to create these portfolios, they will work with me, right? And we can pay them for that service. And so, plus it's really, you know, it's an indication of a game changer where asset owners who really commit to that, they have a different level of commitment as asset owners than if you just dabble around or you're interested in it, right? And so that actually is one leading indicator where I want to use the awareness and consciousness platform in conjunction with this club to move that forward as well. And here is what I'm currently working on is to integrate these investment principles for the Anthropocene, which we talked about in the beginning. So I'm going to end with this, into impact investing, also to your point. And so long run versus trading, we should make these principles and reassert, I talked about this, responsible ownership. You cannot just say, all I want to make money and that's it. This is not a cool thing to do, right? You want to own the stuff to make an impact, right? Including some return. I'm not in the camp of Muhammad Yunus who doesn't want any returns. You know, that doesn't work either. And so here's some themes, you know, that really are themes. And here is what we could do. It's a cartoon that I got from the New Yorker magazine, where, you know, the people who destroyed the planet say, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of shareholder value. That's a lot of people think like this. Yet I'm in Bucky's camp, okay? Yeah. I'm a systems thinker, and Buckminster Fuller is an inspiration to us and to me. And I end with in a call to action for all of us to lead impactful lives and be the architects of your lives, because that's the architect that you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you so much. Just, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas and coming to Innsbruck. And I think we today also agreed that we will come up with more lectures going into depth in some topics, perhaps in autumn concerning topics like leadership, or even the topic of lobbying and making opinions, as we will travel with a tour to Brussels. Study tour, and we will have
a study tour. Come over to my part of the woods too, huh?
In May we will be in San Francisco, and we hope we meet you then. Also in San Francisco,
meet
together
in
with
the hub and then explore.
That will be the right place to be. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you once again for coming.